Welcome, everybody. My name is Kevin Gorham, and my talk is called Bridging the Gap, Creating Trust Between Non-Technical Stakeholders and Engineering Teams. I wanted my talk to just be the biggest mouthful possible. No, really, what I'm here to talk about today is trust. I'm going to talk about it conceptually and give some practical examples, but the practical examples are really oriented around that relationship in the title, but the conceptual part, discussing trust, I think these ideas transcend that single relationship, and hopefully, you can find value in them interpersonally on your teams with colleagues beyond that particular relationship. So before we dive in, I just want to introduce myself a little bit. My name's Kevin Gorham. I'm a full stack web developer for a company called Fine-Tune. We're based out of Chicago. I am kind of a team lead. I do a lot of our agile Scrum stuff. I'm certainly not our technical lead. I've only been a developer for about 3 years. I did a year in QA before that, and I went to a boot camp. I was a tutor and a TA. In my previous life, I worked for a nonprofit at an aquaponic farm for about 7 or 8 years, where we helped homeless families get back in the workforce. We raised fish, tilapia, and we raised plants. And as a young man in my 20s, trying to get people much older than me with scary-looking face tattoos to clean a net full of fish poop, I got a lot of practice building trust with them. So I felt like I could speak to that. So this talk is kind of a journey about my experiences. I certainly don't claim to be the trust expert. If anybody has ideas, things that they think are important that I've missed, please tell me. Personally, I like to golf. I'm very bad at golf. I like to play poker. I'm better at that, but I don't tell people before we play. But why trust me, right? In the words of the dude, this is just like my opinion, man. I have gathered this information from reading books, from my personal mentors, and from my experiences at work, and kind of grouped it together to present to you. So hopefully everyone can find something of value here. And then, like I said, I think I skipped a slide. Oh, no, excuse me. So these are the goals for the talk, pardon me. I want you to understand, what I want people at this talk to understand is why trust is important, why being deliberate about building it can be beneficial to you individually and on your teams. I'm going to talk about a concept called the speed of trust, and then I'm going to give practical examples of how we build trust. So like I said, kind of half conceptual, half practical. So we're going to start with kind of that conceptual hat on and talk about what is trust, right? What does it mean to us? I don't want to give a Webster definition, right? We all can feel trust. We know who we trust. We know who we don't. But why is it important at work, right? And I think that it's clearer if you look at the negative, right? If you imagine a low trust workplace, has anyone here ever had a boss that doesn't trust them? I did. I had a boss. She made me do a email at the end of every day with bullet points of how I spent every minute of my day, 8 a.m. to 8:15 doing this. That was miserable. But that was a low trust environment, right? And I had anxiety. I worried throughout the day. What does she think? Am I doing the right thing? Lots of worry. That worry you can take home from work too, right? If you have a low trust environment at work, you don't trust that your job is secure, then you worry about, finances and money, and then, do you have a family you have to take care of, right? It's kind of a poisonous pill that will infect the rest of your life. So I think it's valuable to try to be intentional about building trust at work. I think you'll be happier, you'll get more raises, you'll be more successful. And there are measurable things that improve as trust goes up. So that's kind of the first concept I want to introduce here, and it's this idea of speed of trust. And the speed of trust says that when trust is high, speed is high and cost is low. And the inverse is true, right? When trust is low, speed goes down, speed is low, and cost is high, right? And we can look at a couple examples of this, right? Take air travel. Before September 11th, you could show up at the airport 30 minutes before your flight, cruise through security, and get on a plane because we had trust that was safe, no big deal, right? After September 11th, we have to prop up the trust of that industry because we were no longer safe. We lost trust in the safety of flying, so we add security. We add more TSA agents. You have to show up 2 or 3 hours early, as many of us experience. Right now, you have to take your shoes off. You have to dance through the medical detector. We prop up this institution because we lost trust. So you have to show up hours earlier. It takes you more time. You have to pay all those TSA agents. You have to pay for the equipment, right? Because trust has gone down, speed has gone down, and cost has gone up, right? The inverse is true. Imagine I was up here and I asked you to invest in my new cryptocurrency Trust Coin, right? It's guaranteed to take off. Doge is a thing of the past. All you need is Trust Coin, right? Who's ready to invest? Not very many. Well, I got one hand, appreciate you, but most people wouldn't be giving me their money because you don't trust me yet, right? I don't have credibility there. If Warren Buffett was speaking and he said he was backing a new cryptocurrency, like you might not even like cryptocurrency, but I'd probably invest if Warren Buffett told me to personally, if he was standing here, because we trust him, right? When trust is high, he can do things quicker. He can make business deals happen just by the merit of his trust. Like people's inherent trust in him will allow him to do things quicker and cheaper than someone else, right? So those are kind of grandiose examples of how this idea plays out. But back to my boss who made me do the bullet point list at the end of every day, I had to stop working 30 minutes early to write that email. I had to maybe take notes during the day so I could remember to put it in my email. And then she would have to spend 20 minutes reading that email and questioning me on it to make sure I was doing the right thing, right? So low trust is like a tax off the top that impacts everything you do. So I think you'll find this to be true if you look at your internal relationships, your projects at works, and try to identify the level of trust and then think about the speed and the cost, and you'll find this concept to be true at all levels. So why do we trust someone, right? We trust people because of their competency and their character. Now, there's many different people who study trust and different things you'll read online, but almost everybody buckets them into these two categories, right? Competency is made up of our capability and our results, right? Capability is our talents, our attitude, our skills, our performance, getting the right things done. And character is made up of our integrity and our intent, right? Being honest, being congruent, or acting in accordance with your beliefs, demonstrating integrity. These things expose your character, right? So if you think about who you trust, family members, spouses, mentors, right? It's probably because hopefully they have both, right? High competency and high character. I want to point out a warning, and the warning is about the high competency, low character employee, right? Low character, low competency, these people just get fired, right? Nobody wants to work with someone who's a jerk and not good at their job, right? And the inverse is pretty clear too, right? High character, high competency, those people are going to be successful and get raises and be promoted, become team leads. But the high competency, low character employee is dangerous. And that's that boss I had. Again, she keeps coming back. People with high capability are kept around longer because, as bosses, as businesses, we want to make money. Hiring new people costs money. It takes time. It takes investment. And if they're delivering results, a lot of times low character or character flaws will be overlooked, right? So I encourage anyone who's on a hiring team or in a hiring department to not undervalue character, right? And not, competency obviously is important, right? I'm not saying it's not, but I'm warning you about the high competency, low character person because they can poison teams, poison attitudes, and they will destroy the trust in your organization, and then your costs will go up and your speed will go down. So beware that person. So we kind of know conceptually what competency and character are, but there are things we can do specifically to demonstrate those parts of us and communicate that we're trustworthy. So character behaviors, speak to who we are, our motives. Talking straight is a good one. I think it's pretty clear. I don't need to break all of these down too much for you. Demonstrate respect. I think we know what that is. If you don't know how to demonstrate respect, we don't have time to teach you today. Creating transparency goes with talking straight, but I think it's a good one, especially for engineers, because we have an opportunity to create transparency around our expectations, right, around a ticket. What is in this ticket? What's expected, right? Creating transparency displays your character. Righting wrongs, I think we know what that is, and showing loyalty. Now, I don't mean blind loyalty, right? I don't show loyalty to a company that you don't believe is loyal to you, right? But trust goes both ways. So I more mean, give credit to others, speak about people as though they're present. We have heard, if you hear someone talking bad about someone, what do you think they're saying when you're not there, right? So they're probably talking bad about you too, right? So showing loyalty to your colleagues, right, demonstrates high character and will get everyone to trust you. So these behaviors are things that just happen naturally, right? We build trust over time by interacting with people, by doing things, and our character will be exposed slowly over time. But I wanted to put them on these slides to show that there are specific things that we can do and we can be intentional about if we want to build trust and foster, a high trust environment. So these are specific behaviors that we can do that help build trust and demonstrate our character. Competency also has, 5 or 6 behaviors that I've highlighted here. Delivering results, right? Figuring out what's important and delivering that. As Yoda says, do or do not, there is no try, right? You deliver the results. Part of displaying your competency is confronting reality, right? The opposite of that would be ignoring reality or being in denial. Kind of a counterfeit version would be to focus on side issues and skirting the real issue. Clarifying expectations, again, it's a good one, and one we have an opportunity to do often, I think, as developers. Practice accountability. Accountability and expectations go hand in hand, right? You can't hold people accountable if you don't have clear expectations. If your stakeholders, your non-technical stakeholders, your CFOs, your CEOs, your product owners, if you don't have clear expectations about what's important to them, then you can't practice accountability against those expectations. So these two things really go together. And then there's a couple of behaviors that really support both, right? Listening first. This is one I struggle with. My brain goes a million miles an hour. And when I'm speaking with people, they say something, it triggers a memory, and I start thinking about my response before they've finished what they're saying, right? So being intentional about listening to understand what someone's saying and then responding significantly is really powerful. Keeping commitments is probably the most important behavior you can do, right? Building trust takes time. We extend trust, right? You guys extended me a little trust coming into this room without knowing me because I was vetted, by the team at Ruby Central. So you're going to extend me a little bit of trust. When you hear my background, you might, boot camp, you might detract some trust, or you might extend some more trust, right? It depends on your position. We all extend trust differently. Different cultures are high trust versus low trust. Some people's life experience has taught them that people cannot be trusted, so they're hesitant to extend trust. Other people believe the best of everyone. So I tend to think the best of people until they prove me otherwise. So I'm generous with my extending of trust, but then to go from that initial extension, it takes time, right? Lots of doing these things, demonstrating these behaviors is how you build trust over time. But you can also destroy trust in a second, right? If you had a best friend of 20 years and you gave them your wallet and they took your debit card and stole your money, like that, they would destroy your trust in one action that you could have been building for 10 or 20 years. So keeping commitments is so important because the better you do at this, just keeping your commitments, the more trust you're going to get. And part of keeping commitments is not over-promising. So to our other behaviors, you need to clarify expectations, right? You can't overcommit if you're going to keep your commitment. So if your boss, if you have your plate full and your boss comes to you with this crazy monkey and he puts it on your desk and he says, handle this monkey because I can't handle it, right? But you have too much. So what do? Some of us are people pleasers and say yes, right? But now you're not going to be able to keep your other commitments. So instead say, I see that this is important to you. I'm happy to do it. Here is my list of priorities as I understand them. Clarify your expectations. Which of these things is less important, right? Do you want me to handle this monkey or this other one that you gave me yesterday? And by clarifying those expectations, you're able to better keep your commitments, and they're going to trust you more. Whereas if I just said yes and took on more than I could do, and then you'd fail to deliver, you're going to to crush that trust, even if at the end of the day you did the same amount, right? How you set those expectations is really important. And the last thing is you have to extend trust. So who is your non-technical stakeholder, right? It's probably different for different people in this room. It could be a CFO, a CEO, a product owner, a project manager. And it's easy to view that person as the enemy or a villain, right? Or someone that always wants more metrics and numbers and doesn't trust me, right? It's easy to kind of paint them in that light. But instead, if you view them as a potential ally, right, your CEO wants you to be successful. He wants your project to be successful. So does your CFO. I'm sure the product owners do, right? You have to extend trust to them. Use these behaviors, create transparency, clarify expectations, and then have accountability against those things, and you're going to build trust and foster that relationship. The last kind of big conceptual idea I want to introduce is this idea of connect, trust, act. And really, it's that the order of these things matter. Again, look at it from the inverse. If you hire a new engineering manager or a new technical lead, somebody who comes in with 25 years of experience, and they just change everything, before you connect, before you have built trust with the team, you're going to be met with a lot of friction, right? Whatever endeavor you try to do, if you haven't built trust and you haven't built a connection, you're going to be less successful, right? So whenever possible, it's best to do these things in this order. And I will say I'm pro boundaries. I heard someone say that, and I liked it, right? I'm not saying, say everything that goes on in your personal life with your bosses, right? But I think there's this idea, especially amongst the youngest generation in the workforce, that I come to work, I do my job, I'm not your friend, you're not my family, and that should be enough. I go home, right? And there are merits to that idea. I'm not here to refute that conceptually, but what I am saying is that if you take the time to connect with the people that you work with your stakeholders, with your peers, it will be easier for them to trust you, and then your actions will be more successful, to the whole speed of trust equation, right? When I got my current job, I interviewed with Learn Academy. I did some technical interviews with Zeal. I interviewed with the business 2 or 3 times. They did a personality quiz. It was kind of it was a big process. And at the end, I was quantifiably behind the other candidate just a little bit. But on all the numerical metrics that the organization had, I was in second place. And in my last interview with my boss, I was demonstrating a website that I had built, and I typed a movie into the box, and I typed in The Big Lebowski. And my now boss, Ben, got super excited, and he held up his mouse pad, and he said, "My mouse pad is the rug from the movie, from The Big Lebowski." And he got so excited, right? And we were able to connect a little bit, right? And if the other candidate was quantifiably better than me, why did I get hired? Because I was better at connecting and building trust with my potential employer. So he felt safer hiring me than someone else who, by all metrics, was as good or better than me, right? But because I had fostered a connection, he was able to extend trust easier, and I got the job. So, your mileage may vary, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all situation, right? Back to Warren Buffett, he doesn't need to spend time connecting for us to trust him. In every situation, it doesn't apply. But when possible, I advocate trying to be deliberate about these things in this order, and you'll get better results. So, how do we build trust, right? We've talked about these behaviors. And this is kind of where we shift into the more specific examples in our industry here. We all can't be as inherently trustworthy as this dog here. So, for the rest of us, what do we do, right? Well, we have meetings. I think probably many of us have had bad meetings, right? Or too many meetings, or meetings that are unproductive. But we recognize that there are meetings that are productive and are important and are critical, right, for our success. So use your stand-ups as opportunities to talk straight, create transparency, right wrongs, practice accountability. Right? In your retrospectives, practice accountability, demonstrate respect, give props to your coworkers who have done something good. Your IPM, your iteration planning meetings, or your backlog grooming meetings are great times to clarify expectations, right? The engineer who is in that meeting, who is clarifying expectations, who is confronting reality, yeah, that would be great, but we need to upgrade Postgres first, right? That demonstrates competency and builds trust. So my advice is participate in these meetings. And the more you participate, the more you demonstrate these behaviors, the more people will trust you, right? If you have one-on-ones, have them consistently, especially if you're in the position of power or you have direct reports who are reporting to you during a one-on-one meeting. Do not cancel that whenever possible, right? Things come up, life happens. I know you can't just say never cancel, but it's gonna happen sometimes. But keeping commitments builds trust, right? I have a one-on-one with my boss every Thursday. If during the week things come up that I want to discuss with him, I jot it down. We have a Slack channel of notes. We can send it back and forth. And then on Thursday, we go to that channel and we discuss those things. Because I trust that that's going to happen. We have a high trust relationship. I don't have to interrupt my workday to handle that right then, right? If I come across something that needs to be addressed, I can trust that this is going to happen. So I don't interrupt his day. I don't interrupt my day. I can remain focused, right? Context switching comes at a cost. So by being consistent, keeping that commitment, you increase trust, and it will make your other days more efficient, right? It's where speed of trust comes in. So I would also add for the one-on-ones, I advise spend some time connecting, right? If it's a 30-minute one-on-one, it can be 2 minutes, it can be 5 minutes. Some days it happens more than others. It'll happen naturally, right? But if you're deliberate about trying to connect with your coworkers, your direct reports, your stakeholders, the connection exposes our character. And when someone understands your character, it's easier for them to buy into your intents and motives. And so it's easier for them to trust you. So I advise you spend some time connecting, right? And then there's stakeholder meetings, right? Quarterly, semi-annually, whatever you have opportunities, connect, trust, act, use those behaviors with your stakeholders to increase trust. So give a presentation on Agile, right? Explain how it works. Who here has been asked this question? When will it be done? Who has the answer? This is not rhetorical. I would love to know the answer. If anyone knows how to answer this, I would love it, right? So talking about this in an Agile context, okay, and I'm going to paraphrase Sandy Metz because we're reading her book in our book club right now, and she talks about Agile and basically says that, Agile believes your customers can't define what they want without seeing it. So we should show them sooner rather than later. Get feedback and then iterate. And this resulting software could not have been created by any other means because no one knew what it would look like before we started building it. So if that's true, if we don't know what it's going to look like, then no one can predict when the application is going to be done because no one knows what it will do. Try telling that to your CFO or your CEO, right? It will never be done, right? We're going to work on it forever. And again, I don't have the answer here, right? But I have some advice, which is to create trust in that relationship. And then the questions will shift, right, to be maybe smarter questions or maybe more focused on things that are measurable, right? So communicate, right? Create trust with the behaviors I mentioned in the meetings we mentioned. Invite them to your meetings. And identify what metrics are important to your stakeholders, right? A CFO is interested in different things than a CEO. My last CEO, he wanted me to come with 3 things to every meeting. No more, no less. He liked things in 3s, so that's how you do it, right? Figure out what your stakeholder wants and give that to them, and that builds trust. So leverage data. Data communicates our capability, right? It's how we deliver our results, or it should show how we're delivering our results. So leverage what you have, right? We all use different tools, Pivotal, Tracker, Trello, Jira, whatever. I know GitHub has one built in. Whatever project management tool you have, it probably has metrics built into it. So, if they exist, leverage them, right? So our project is using Pivotal Tracker. It has some built-in metrics and analytics, which you can look at, you can export. Some are more useful to me and our team than others, right? Your mileage may vary. Some other metric might be more important to you than others, right? The metrics on the screen are not important. They're just to show what Pivotal can do. But there are some problems. It only goes back 3 months, right? So if I want a bigger picture of what's going on, I either need to keep exporting the data every 3 months and then combine it in a spreadsheet, or you can deal with their API, which as a developer, I leaned into. So what I did was I used Google Apps Scripts at the advice of my mentor and Pivotal Tracker's API to create a custom kind of data analytics spreadsheet to give my boss the metrics that he cared about. Google Apps Scripts, if you're not familiar, is an API that Google puts out that allows you to interact with the G Suite dynamically via JavaScript. So it's low barrier to entry, and their API is really well documented. I use it with Google Sheets here. And you can do cool stuff like add a button to the page. So I added a sprint planning button with 2 sub-menu items, build sprint and get story data. And then you can link functions to the on-click event of that button. So when you click this button, do this thing. So the first thing, that first button, that build sprint data, builds a sprint that looks like this. It starts blank, but this is kind of what our sprint overview template looks like. And I pull this up during our retro meetings when we're giving people time to fill in the retro board. So what went well, what didn't go well, you give people a couple minutes to fill that in. And I pull up our sprint template, and we ask everyone what days off they have. Our CFO really cares about a velocity equation that includes time or developer hours. So we look at how many days are in this sprint, how many developers do we have, we get developer hours, and we can, we can use our velocity and come up with a ratio of points per dev hour, points per dev day, which is really important to my CFO. We identify the sprint focus and write that down, and then we can pull that back out during other, agile meetings during the week if we want to remind ourselves what our focus is. And then the sprint details section starts blank. And then at the end of the sprint, we click Get Story Data. And I use, I love date math. Who loves date math as developers, right? I use every story that got the accept button clicked during the window of that start and end date for the sprint. So everything that got finished gets pulled into here, and then you can aggregate the data, right? We at Finetune, we manage other companies' expenses. We manage uniform expenses, and we manage a couple other lines of business, but uniforms was like our bread and butter for about, 15 years. And we're expanding into these other lines of business. We're building new functionality in our app to handle these other lines of business. And primarily right now, that's waste. So we manage, for Pet Boys, we help manage their cost for their dumpsters and things all across the country. So one metric that's really important to my bosses is how much of our work is being spent on this line of business versus the other. And so that's not easily tracked in Pivotal, right? That's unique to my use case, which is where the API can become really powerful. So whatever metrics are important to your organization or your stakeholder, you can leverage the tools to give them that. So we use labels. I put particular labels on the story to group them into the categories that matter to my bosses, and then aggregate them. So every sprint, we kind of come up with all this data, and there's more that I chopped off here. There's like a little scoreboard on the bottom that puts points into categories. But then I have a main sheet that aggregates that data. And again, this data is not particularly relevant to you guys. I don't want you to do this exactly, right? But I take the data from each sprint and then aggregate it. So we can see in context how we're doing this sprint versus the last sprint, right? You can look at this year's data versus last year's data, whatever it is. You can build, pie charts, graphs. The velocity graph there shows 3 lines. One is points per sprint, and then there's a short-term average and a long-term average, which I'm going to talk about. This is just a data tip to focus on trend, right? What happened in this sprint is interesting and important, but what's more important is how are we trending, right? You have to be careful making decisions on data with a small sample size, right? So the more data we have, the better, the more secure it is, the more safe we can feel in our assumptions. So when you're communicating this information to your stakeholders, I advise you focus on trends and give them trend data. How are we trending? How are our averages over the last 3 sprints versus over the last 5 to 10 sprints, right? How many sprints you look at is up to you and your environment and your sprint cycle. But the point is, more relevant and more valuable information, I think, can be gleaned by viewing the data as an average over time than trying to dig in too much to what happened in this one particular sprint, let's say. So then you've created this amazing spreadsheet, you have all this data, now you need to deliver it to your stakeholders. So I suggest sending an email at the end of every sprint with the key metrics and data that your stakeholders want. Now, don't expect a response to this email every time, as they come to rely on it because you send it every 2 weeks. They will not feel the need to respond, but they will notice if you don't send it. So after a few, if you haven't received a response, reach out and clarify expectations. Hey, is this serving your needs? Is this giving you the information you want? Just wanted to check in everything's okay, right? Don't just send it into the ethos and then never go back to it. But it doesn't have to be, a back and forth communication. It's just a check-in point. So identify who it's for. And based on who the email is for, who your stakeholder is, the metrics that matter to them are going to be different, right? So figure out what, companies call them KPIs, key performance indicators, or key metrics, or whatever is important to your stakeholder. Figure out what those things are, leverage your data, and deliver it to them consistently. Highlight the trends. I talked about, the pros and cons of trend data versus individual sprints. And then add context. So the data is just data. It doesn't tell a story. And it's up to us to interpret that data and make assumptions. And the farther removed your stakeholders are from the process, the harder it is for them to make assumptions and make the right assumptions. So use this as an opportunity to add context and explain things. We recently lost a senior developer, and we had 2 senior developers. Our other senior developer really stepped up, and he started doing all the code reviews and pairing with everyone and basically facilitated the whole team's success while we lost one of our other key senior engineers who was doing some of this work, splitting the load. Now, if you looked at his metrics individually, you might see the number of points contributed go down and say, what happened, right? But that the data isn't telling the whole story. That senior engineer is the most valuable person on our team, and he's in this room right now, Eric Guzman. I'm not just saying that, though. But so the data doesn't tell that story, right? The data shows Eric's contributions went down, when I think the reality is that Eric's contributions went up. So add context. Don't just give them the data and say, you do what you want with it, right? You can help paint the picture of what really happened because you're there and you're closest to it. And then that last piece is be consistent, right? Do this consistently. Send this email every 2 weeks. Deep in our brain is our pattern recognition center. It's core to who we are as humans. If you are consistent, if you do this consistently, you will create trust. Trust will grow, right? There's no other way to say it. So this is what that email looks like. Again, yours will be different, but essentially I talk about the number of releases we complete, the work completed. I pull in the sprint data for just that sprint, and then I put it on a graph so that they can see context, right? How did this sprint look versus the last one? Again, use trend data if you have that, because I think that tells a better story. I wanted the context to go on top when I sent this email, so I actually advocate that you do your analysis first, right? Tell the story you want to tell first. This email, in my case, was for my boss, the CTO, and he uses it with his boss, the CFO, or coworker, I guess. And for them, they really cared about these particular metrics, and they wanted it on top. So again, give them what they want, right? I put it on top, and my analysis got bumped down, but I still get it in there. So if you can, I actually advise putting the analysis on top. Then, again, how my date math worked was I looked at every ticket that got that accept button clicked within the sprint, but that doesn't tell the whole story, right? There's a lot of work in progress. There's a lot of work in QA. There's some sprint-focused tickets that aren't quite done or are blocked because of something else. So the in-progress section is where I give a little more context, right, around things of what happened that's outside the scope of the original spreadsheet. And then number 3 there is that analysis, right? It's where you have time to interpret the data that you're presenting to your stakeholders and help, clarify expectations, practice accountability, create transparency about what's really going wrong. And then I put a link at the bottom to the actual spreadsheet so they can go in and look at the data as a whole, cumulatively. So do that consistently, and it will build trust. This slide was supposed to go to resources. It's a lie. It goes to my LinkedIn. I didn't get quite everything put together. It's not a ruse. I will update it. I wanted to add a link to my code for the Google Apps Scripts code that I wrote. That's on GitHub. I just don't have the link here for you. And then my email template, and you can take a look at what the spreadsheet looks like and stuff. So anything you've seen, I'm going to update this when I give it to Ruby Central and they release all the slides for all the talks. So come back for that. And then My last slide, I just wanted to point out a couple sources. I quoted Sandy Metz. Speed of Trust is a book from Stephen Covey, if anyone's interested in reading more about that. And then, like I said, this is really an amalgamation of knowledge that I've gained from my mentors, Adam Cuppy, Eric Guzman, a couple other mentors that I've worked with. And I make no claim of ownership of this. I'm just organizing it to present to you, that hopefully in a way that you find useful. So what I wanted you to take from the talk today is that trust is important, it's valuable. The impacts of trust are measurable and will benefit you. It will benefit you personally in your relationships, and in this particular relationships with your non-technical stakeholders. And if you still don't believe me, you just have to trust me. Thank you very much. We finished a few minutes early, so if anyone wants to ask questions, go right ahead. Hi. So if anyone couldn't hear, I think she was asking, like, it takes two to connect, and if the other person is very reserved, how do you build that connection? Salesmen are really good at it, and there's science around it, like body mirroring, things you can do, mirroring, vocal stuff. I don't do that personally because it seems almost manipulative. My approach is I just speak truthfully and try. I am who I am, right? I talk straight, and I try to display consistent character so that they come to trust me, and over time are more willing to connect. It's tough, right? And you can't control someone else, right? Like extending trust, connection takes two people to do it. And if your coworker, especially your boss, right, if they're in a position of authority and they're not interested in connecting, then I don't know, there's too much you can do. But I think it would happen slowly over time when their walls come down a little bit. But yeah, not easy, and I'm certainly no expert there. Yeah. So she's asking about some of these categories that we use. I'll come back to the slide. Boop, boop. Okay, so we aggregate by uniform versus waste through labels, and then we also generic is just, it's a feature that but it impacts both lines of business. We have one app, so there's certain things that are not one or the other. Bugs and chores, right, are categories that we care about, right? The number of bugs being released, and are we trending down? How many chores we're doing? Certain people count points for bugs and chores, and other people don't, right? So if you don't, but those things are important, you can aggregate them. We break it down by developer too. We look at number of stories too, and again the trend data there. I'm trying to think. We also care about our tool generates invoices for our customers and generates reports for our account managers. And so another metric that our company cares about is how much of our work is going to support the account managers and how much of the work supports our billing and makes us more money. And then again, kind of a catch-all category for generic improvements that don't directly support either one. So those are the things that are important for my boss and our line of business that they care about. And so we do that by creating labels in Pivotal, and then the JavaScript logic looks for certain labels and then aggregates the data that way. So it'll be different for your line of business, I'm sure, in your use case. Yes, sir. So for us, we use the Fibonacci sequence for pointing. That Pivotal is very opinionated on how you should point things. So it's 1 through 8, with the idea being it's a lot easier to say what's a 3 versus a 5 than it is to say what's a 3 versus a 4 versus a 5. What points mean to our team is different than what they mean to your team, right? We just develop that convention, and then when pointing, what we do is we do like Rochambeau, and all the developers say what they think a ticket's points are, and then I take the highest point, and it's up to the lower pointers to convince the high pointers to come down. So if I say it's a 2 and everyone else said it was a 5, I have to convince them why this ticket is actually much simpler than they think it is. And if they're unable to, then we take the high number. So over time, as new people come on, they don't really know. They throw points up, and then you start to get a feel. For us, a 1-pointer is like a copy change, right? Change the text here. Something basically as simple as it can be. For us, that's a 1-pointer. If it's more complex, if I have to write a test, it's going to be a 2. or more, right? And then there's ambiguity. Certain things are wrong. We don't point after the fact. My boss wants to go back and change points, but then that incentivizes the wrong behavior, and there's problems with that. So that's how we manage it. I'm sure there's probably other good ways too, but that's how we do it. All right, yeah, I think we're out of time, but thank you guys. Line of business for us, yeah, LOB. Thank you guys. Thank you very much.